is now dry. I have sanded the edges a bit and smoothed just around here. And what I've done here is I've just drawn a sun on a piece of paper. I'm going to use it as a template for my clay. And essentially when we cut the clay out, it will go right here in the center of the bowl. So for this next section, what you are going to need is just some diluted white glue and your clay and your rolling pin. I have a jar of diluted white glue that I just keep on my desk, being I sculpt all the time. And what you also should do is have an old paintbrush that is dedicated, because you don't want to mess up your good paintbrushes with the glue. So I have my glue, my old paintbrush, my template, my rolling pin, my clay bowl, my clay, and my little knife to cut it out. So I'm just going to move this out the way for a minute and grab some clay. And I'm going to go ahead and just roll that out. That should be thin enough. I don't want it too thin. And then I'm going to put my template on it. And then, using my craft knife, or whatever knife you have, I'm just going to go ahead and cut around as accurately as I can. But we are going to stick this down and smooth the edges, so if it's not entirely accurate, that is actually okay. I'm not going to get rid of this just yet because I also want to do that circle a little higher, because I'm going to have it rounded. So this is what I used as a template for my circle. So I'm going to cut that there and put that aside. So that will go in the center of my sun for the face. So there I have my two pieces. You have your sun shape and you have your bowl. So what we're going to do is use the paintbrush to just spread a nice even coat of the diluted white glue. This will help it to stick because this is wet clay going on dry clay. If it was wet on wet, you wouldn't need this. But it's a good idea to do this when you're doing wet on dry. So you have your clay. We're going to place that in the bowl like that. So our sun is now in the middle of the bowl. And what I'm going to do is just use a damp paintbrush. Once again, you have one dedicated to your clay work, so you don't ruin your good paintbrushes. And I'm just going to use this to go around the edges to smooth. And I'm also kind of pushing under a bit. I don't know if you can see that, to just try close any gaps between the clay and the bowl, the wet clay and the dry clay here. So I'm pushing down gently and I'm using my paintbrush as a sculpting tool, and I'm closing any gaps between the dry clay and the wet clay. This will help ensure that we have a nice seal and the clay doesn't lift when it's dry. Now we've got those edges smoothed. I'm just smoothing the top bits. Now we can add the circle in the middle. That will be the face. And what we can do here is just use a sculpting tool just to blend those edges down. And then once again we use the paintbrush to help smooth. So this is going to be where we have the incense stick. So I'm just using it's a knitting needle actually, and I'm just making a hole wide enough to hold it. I'm going right through to the bowl. That should be wide enough. You don't want to do it too wide that it falls over, but at the same time you want to make sure it's wide enough that the stick will actually go in it. So I'm trying to do that in the center, because when it's dry I'll add the face with a paintbrush or a marker. And that's about it for this stage. You can leave this to dry overnight. And then when it's fully dry, we'll give it another sand in, add a coat of gesso, and get into painting. The bowl is now dry. I have sanded it and added a coat of gesso, and I'm going to start painting. For the paint, we are using Apple Barrel Acrylics by Plaid Crafts. These are great paints for painting Creative Paperclay. I am using a white and a bright yellow, and also a flag red. I also have here some golden acrylic glaze in liquid. I will use this after to add a glaze over the entire bowl. So I'm just going to begin by painting the entire thing. I have mixed a little of the yellow and the white here. And I'm going to cover everything. This will be my base coat. And when this is completely covered, I will go in and start painting the sun. For the sun, we'll be mixing the red and the yellow. Give us a nice bright sun. Be sure to turn it on the side so you can get into those little crevices under there. We don't want to leave any parts out. No white must show through. I think we have it fully covered there now. I'm going to dry this a bit, and then I'm going to flip it over and paint the other side. When we come back, I will start painting the sun. I've added just a dot of red to my yellow hair, and added some of that yellow and white mixture as well, just to give it more body. And I'm going to go ahead and do my first coat for my sun. Now this is gonna need another coat. The yellow is very translucent. That's why I added a little bit of that white mixture with the yellow. But as you can see, it's still very translucent. And I'm gonna more than likely add a second coat. I'm painting in the direction that the rays of the sun will go, as opposed to that way. And I'm bringing the paint strokes into the center. That way, if there are any lines left, it will definitely complement the sun's rays. Alright, now I've got the rays covered. I'm going to go in and do the sides. very carefully. Once again, you have to turn it on its side. Maybe use a smaller paintbrush if needed. And go in and just add those sides. We'll just use a very fine brush when this is dry and go in and clean up any edges. Make sure there are no light yellow parts left. Now you've totally covered all areas of your sun. You may or may not need a top coat, depends how thin your paint is, how pigmented it is, and if you used the gesso. If you don't want the lines in your paint, you can wait till it's thoroughly dry and give it a light sand between layers. I like to embrace the texture, so I will leave mine alone. Using a softer paintbrush also helps with lines, and and how heavy you press down with your paintbrush as well. So I think I've got all of my sun covered. Let's see how that dries, and I'll decide if it needs another coat. To finish up, we are going to add our glaze. I have mixed orange using the bright yellow and the flag red, and added some glazing liquid. I'll add a little bit more here. And basically what this does is it makes a nice glaze, so the paint will be translucent. So you're going to want to mix that in thoroughly. So this mixture is the red, the yellow, and the glaze. And I'll just show you before we move on to our sculpture how the glaze is. So this is a lot of glaze on my brush because I used it to mix, but when you thin it out, as you can see, it's a nice translucent layer. And this particular one is glossy. I want glossy because it's easier to brush the little particles off when your incense stick burns. We will also use a gloss varnish when we're finished. So that essentially is how the glaze will look. So it doesn't completely, it's not opaque, it's very, very translucent. I recommend using a soft brush. I'm going to start on the back so you can see. And I'm going to put this over the entire bowl. You could use a sponge brush as well if you wanted to get rid of these lines easier. Alright, now I'm going to move on to my sun. And I'm going to begin by just going around those edges and pulling it out. And we're going to do everything. So what's going to happen is that here where the light yellow is, the one that would mix with the white, is going to be a slightly lighter shade than the one where we have the full yellow sun. So I'm just going to go ahead and cover this, and when it's dry we can add some gloss varnish. I recommend gloss because, and I'd probably do about 2 coats because of wiping it off when the incense burns, all the little powder that's left. You want to wipe that off properly. So I would do 2 coats of your favorite gloss varnish and then it should be done. I should mention, if the If it's too thick, like, or too dark rather, you can go ahead and add more glazing medium. Just use it on your paintbrush like you would water, and use it just to go over, and it will thin it out a bit. It works much better than water, and it's a clear fluid, so it will definitely thin out your paint without losing any of the pigmentation. I'm ready to start varnishing now because it's fully dry. I have my gloss varnish here. This one is actually water resistant, which is great. It thins with water. So I'm gonna give this a coat. I might do two, as I said before. I'm not sure, it depends how it looks. You can also use a paintbrush for this. I'm just trying to avoid the lines as much as possible that you do get with paintbrushes sometimes with varnish. So this will seal it, and it will give it a nice gloss finish. As I said before, the gloss finish is important because we want to be able to wipe off the powdery stuff, the ashes that come from burning your incense stick. So the gloss finish will just make it easier to wipe. So I'm giving it a coat now. I'll let it dry and possibly give it another coat. I'm not sure. I'll see how it feels. And that's it. We are finished our bowl, our incense burning bowl. I do hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please remember to like my video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any future videos.